Monogamy, or being in a relationship with one person, is actually very uncommon among mammals, with only around 3% displaying monogamous bonding.
Because monogamy is ridiculous, and people aren't any good at it.
You know, monogamy is basically for guys who don't have games.
I didn't really understand, like, why wouldn't you be able to, like, do other things with other people, but then just, like, have your main partner, basically?
What's the longest you've been in a monogamous situation?
Monogamous?
No.
Why are we monogamous when every aspect of our biology, history, and sexual desire tells us we shouldn't be? When there are countless statistics that point to monogamy being a source of depression, sexlessness, and financial ruin. Is monogamy simply an archaic artifact of a world where resources were scarce and child mortality was 1 in 3? Why not escape our oppression and work towards a more polyamorous society? What isn't obvious is that monogamy is the foundation of almost all liberal and stable nations. Polyamory, on the other hand, is commonplace in the world's most dangerous, corrupt, and fragile states. To understand this relationship, we're going to examine what is referred to as Africa's polyamory band and what I'm calling the Incel Armies of Africa. Polyamory is the act of being married to 2 or more people at the same time. This almost always takes form in polygyny, which is when a man is married to 2 or more women. This practice is extremely common in sub-Saharan African countries, stretching from Senegal through Mali, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, and ending in South Sudan. This strip is what makes up Africa's polyamory band. Now, there isn't a lot of data on South Sudan because it's so new and war-torn. I'm gonna give them their own segment because this is the country most affected. You're probably wondering why polygamy is so common in Africa. There's this Western tendency to think of Africa as a whole coherent area with one history.
Can you name any country on this map?
Africa.
Africa?
Africa.
It's actually the most genetically and linguistically diverse continent on the planet, with 3,000 ethnic groups and 2,100 different languages. Compare that to Europe, which only has 87 ethnic groups, or about 1/3 of only Nigeria, and this starts to come into perspective. There are 2 major culprits for Africa's polygamy. The first being that historically leading men would take multiple wives from different ethnic groups to symbolically unite the region that he led. This translates now to having multiple wives being a symbol of status and wealth. Pair this with the West African slave trade, which wiped out the male population and the gender balance of the area. You have the disproportionately small group of men that remain taking multiple wives. If there's any African scholars watching, please comment below. Tell me all about Africa. I spent so much of this research in a Wikipedia rabbit hole because Africa's so interesting. Give a little like and sub while you're down there. I'm trying to start a little compound here. Now, not all of these countries are completely unstable. You know, we can look at like the Fun for Peace's Fragile State Index to see if there's any crossover between polygamous countries and unstable nations. Countries like Senegal and Ghana seem to be doing fine, but almost all the countries in this region fill out the list of the top 20 most fragile states. Now, this is all interesting, but does this prove there's a relationship between polygamy and instability? Before we get there, let's start with another issue that the West doesn't experience at all. Bride price is the practice of paying the bride's family for her hand in marriage, and is practiced in some form in many parts of the world. Now, in many places, bride price is symbolic, where the exchange of money is like under $100. But in some places, it's as steep as thousands of dollars or large amounts of livestock. Now, if you're in the West and you're thinking this practice sounds archaic and sexist, it's taken very seriously in parts of the world, especially in Africa, where the marriage isn't even legal without bride price. And it's hard to organize this by country because we're really talking about ethnic groups, right? These borders are meaningless. These borders were drawn up in World War I. So ignore these. Look at this. Look how crazy this map is. Now, like polygamy, I was trying to find why bride price is so common in Africa and the history of bride price. It turns out that it's so old that ancient texts speak of it as an already established practice. The Code of Hammurabi, which is the world's oldest code of law, created around 1750 BC, mentions that if a man seeks a new wife after already paying bride price for his current wife, he's not entitled to a refund. This implies that at the time in ancient Mesopotamia, during the writing of the first code of law, bride price was already an established custom. It's assumed that you'd be paying the bride's family because you're taking a source of labor away from them, but I actually have no clue. If I could go back in time, if I could figure it out, I'd do it for you, and I'd stay. I'd stay there, I'd have 10 kids and a big farm. Every day would be teeming with meaning. The sun glistening in my eyes. I'd be sunning my balls, feeding my family, fighting off predators, protecting my village. Instead, I'm stuck in front of the screen. So why is bride price important? Well, it creates a legally binding economic barrier to the act of marriage and family creation, which means that there will be a power imbalance with an elite few who can easily afford the economic barrier and a large underclass who are too poor to afford it. Now let's say, for the sake of the supply and demand argument, that every man wants a wife and there's 50 men and 50 women. But not every man can afford a wife, and polygamy is widely practiced, so not only can the privileged few afford a wife, but they can afford multiple, throwing off the gender balance. If the top 10% wealthiest and most powerful men all have 4 wives, then the bottom 30% don't have the opportunity to get married. Look, when you're talking about men and women and you start saying shit like top 10% man and supply and demand, people turn their brains off because you sound like a red pill nerd, as they should. So let me put this another way. This system creates a scenario where almost 20% of the population will never have a chance to have a family simply because of greed and economic barriers. That's about the same amount of Americans who say they will never be able to afford a home. Alright, but this isn't that bad though, right? Swaths of angry and lonely young men with absolutely zero purpose or love, forging their own path together, that isn't dangerous or anything. It's not like that's not the single most destabilizing force in the entirety of human history.
East Nigeria. It's rare footage of the group Boko Haram. The insurgents filmed this themselves.
The deadliest jihadist terrorist group of the 2010s, deadlier than ISIS, is called Boko Haram. They're an African group responsible for the deaths of 50,000 people, the displacement of over 2 million, and the creation of a famine during the peak of their reign in territory that encompassed northern Nigeria, parts of Chad, Niger, and Cameroon. What separated Boko Haram from other terrorist groups was the mass abduction of adolescent girls. The reason being that their main recruits were poor young men who couldn't afford marriage. Boko Haram could offer their recruits a cheap or free bride in exchange for their servitude. ISIS has been known to offer cheap arranged marriages for their recruits as well. A report on the Lord's Resistance Army in 2008, made famous by a documentary called Coney 2012, also found similar findings. Sub-Saharan Africa is now the global epicenter of terrorism, accounting for 60% of all terrorist attacks in 2022, with the vast majority of these taking place in the Sahel region, a band of land stretching from Senegal through all the aforementioned countries in Africa's polygamy band. The total correlation between these areas can't be confirmed or denied, as so much of Africa's violence goes underreported and undocumented due to the volatility and remoteness. But the similarities between these two maps are nevertheless jarring. The only missing piece on the polygamy map is South Sudan. South Sudan is the world's newest country. Now, in South Sudan, the bride price is paid with livestock, and that can be anywhere from 30 to 300 cattle. With this, we face the same inequality issue, where with the more cattle that somebody owns, the easier it is to accumulate even more cattle, and the easier it is to accumulate more wives. In South Sudan, almost 50% of women are involved in a polygamous relationship. This leaves South Sudan with a sexless underclass of men who have to resort to deadly cattle raids in order to secure the funds to pay a bride price. Now, I'm not trying to say that polygamy is Africa's biggest problem. However, I am arguing that there is a direct link between polygamy and instability, something we don't consider in the West because polygamy isn't common enough to affect social order. As Gen Z loses faith in the institution of marriage, the social order of the West will slowly become undone. If you're watching this video, there's a very high chance you could not compete in a completely polygamous society. This is to say nothing of your competence or your intelligence or what you bring to the table. This is speaking on the fact that the animal world is completely unfair and unjust, and we have built society to abstract ourselves from that. And in the case of men who can swing having multiple partners, monogamy is a sacrifice. But there's a better way to explain this. Monogamy is more like the checks and balances that a good government implements to stop the creation of monopolies. Monopolies are prevented and broken up to even the playing field in the free market. This may harm harm an elite few, but it's far better and more stabilizing for society as a whole. The same can be said for monogamy, which should be expressed as an egalitarian force rather than an oppressive one, creating equality of opportunity for anybody who wants to start a family. The one path you were given when you gained consciousness was to make more of yourselves. We don't practice bride price in the West. However, the effects of bride price do a good job of representing the concentration of power. Be it monetary, political, or sexual, power will always concentrate towards the top. The democratic process and the free market help slow the eventual concentration of power, but the narratives and customs that we created are really what keep society organized and equal. Monogamy is perhaps the most stabilizing and egalitarian force we have in the West, and must be protected at all costs. Hey, thank you so much for watching my video. We got 2 classics up here on the screen. If you want to check it out, if you want to support me, support the channel, we got the Patreon, we have my Instagram, join the Discord. We're on this journey together. We're gonna figure out what life is all about, because no one taught me, so I had to figure it out on my own. I'm sure you're in the same boat as me. I love you. God bless. Never kill yourself.